This episode's sponsored by Palmetto Project. 40 years ago, South Carolina leaders championed the idea that every social and economic challenge in our state could be solved through innovation. They believed in the power of new ideas to fulfill the promise of our home. Since 1984, the Palmetto Project has listened to and partnered with community leaders and members to transform our state through 330 public-private partnerships. Today, our programs address early literacy for more than 23,000 children through Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, civic engagement, and equitable access to healthcare through the only statewide nonprofit health insurance agency in the country, and more. Learn more at palmettoproject.org or at our Facebook and Instagram accounts.
On this podcast, Simple Civics Greenville County, we are all about civic engagement, which includes voting, especially in the primaries, when just a small percentage of South Carolina's registered voters participate, but when many of the important decisions on who represents you are made. Currently, there are at least 5 bills filed in the South Carolina House of Representatives and Senate related to primary voting. I'm Katie Smith with Greater Good Greenville, and on this episode of Simple Civics Greenville County, we start a mini-series on policies and statutes related to primary voting, what's proposed and how it compares to other states. I'll have a brief conversation about it today with our producer, Nathaniel DeSantis. Then, for the next 2 episodes after this one, you'll hear from a legal expert on election law about what potential changes mean and how they work elsewhere. So please be sure to listen next week and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out.
We have spent a lot of time talking about primaries on this podcast, from discussing the general importance of voting in the statewide primary to interviewing almost all of our Greenville County primary candidates. But this year, there's a possibility that the legislature will change the rules about how primaries will work, and we're going to talk about it today. So, Katie, what's proposed?
There's actually 4 bills filed in the House of Representatives and 1 in the Senate that I can tell there may be more, and more may come along. 4 of the bills are essentially about closing primaries and requiring party registration. As we hope you know, in South Carolina, we do not register to vote with any party affiliation. So even if you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian, and you participate in all of those activities, you did not register to vote as a member of that party. And you can currently vote in any one primary you wish in any election cycle. So for instance, I live in the city of Greenville, and we will have elections this year, which are partisan in the city of Greenville. We don't know who's running yet, but let's just say we have 2 Democrats running for a seat in the Greenville city primary. I might decide to vote in the Democratic primary so that I can have a say in who represents me. But then in June of 2026, next year, let's say only 2 Republicans file to run for the House of Representatives seat that represents me. Then I might want to vote in the Republican primary so I have a say in that race. So since I am not registered with a party, I can choose to have a voice for the candidates and races that I am interested in South Carolina. If this changes in future elections, you would have to pick a party and stick with it, at least for some period of time. So some bills require you to take action before the 2026 June primary to register with a party before you can vote in that election. Another one automatically registers you with a party by virtue of whichever primary you choose to vote in.
This seems like kind of a massive, monumental shift from how the system worked leading up to now, right?
Yeah, it would be a big change. Now, there's another bill proposed that is a very different kind of change, and that introduces ranked choice voting in municipal elections. That's House Bill 3589. So currently, if a seat is nonpartisan, as several of the cities in Greenville County are, you could have 3 people run for a seat, and each of them could get about a third of the vote. And in that case, it has to go to a runoff. So if no one gets 50% of the vote plus 1 vote, it goes automatically to a runoff, which is a lot of effort. It's a lot of expense. Very few people turn out because they don't realize what's happening. So ranked choice voting is a way to work around that. It's a little complicated, and in a future episode, we'll talk with an elections expert about how that works.
So I'm kind of curious to know, is this normal across other states? Is this kind of one of many ways? Is this unique to South Carolina? What's the landscape look like?
I appreciate that. I'm sure if you all listening have moved here from somewhere else, you might have thought, well, in Florida, we did it this way, or in Michigan, we did it that way. And I myself wondered, yeah, what is the norm? I think the only norm is there really is no norm. People do it in varied ways. And when we talk with our elections expert next week, we'll hear more about it. But here are some of the numbers. So, open primaries, like we currently have, are used by 13 states. It is the most predominant kind of primary, if you can call 13 states that. So, again, in this system, we don't register by party. We choose which primary we want to vote in each primary. Supporters of this approach say that it maintains privacy of the voter's interest and allows for maximum flexibility for voters. So, no one can point their finger and say, Katie is definitely a such and such. I mean, unless I always donate that way or I always vote that way, because we don't have a card that says this is the party that we are in. 7 states have primaries that are open to unaffiliated voters. So here you can register by party, and then you get to vote in only your party's primary. But if you don't affiliate, like if you're an independent, you can vote in either. So it's, open to unaffiliated. 4 states have partially open primaries. And let me say, this is a little confusing to me. So here you can cross party lines, but voting in a primary effectively changes your registration. It basically sounds like you can go back and forth. Like if I'm voting in a Democratic primary, my registration is changing to Democrat, but then I can switch for the next primary. So any of you listening who are from Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, or Ohio, which is where those partially open primaries are, might be able to better explain this to me. 9 states use partially closed primaries. So here the state allows the parties to decide whether to let unaffiliated voters participate. Partially open, every unaffiliated can participate anywhere they want. But here, registered Democrats can't vote in Republican primaries and vice versa. But the Democratic Party might allow independent voters to participate, but the Republican Party might decide to keep them out and let only Republicans in. So there's a lot of autonomy to the parties to decide. 10 states have closed primaries, which is what's being discussed by our legislature, in which only party members can vote in their primary and independents cannot vote in a primary. And lastly, 5 states have a really different form, like a multi-party primary, in which everyone running for the office is on the same primary ballot and the top 2 vote getters, for instance, go on the general, meaning like they could both be Republicans if they're really popular, or Democrats. And this is what California has. Some of y'all might have heard this on the news about how that works. So next week, our elections expert, Michael Domino, will walk through those in more detail and what they mean. But what you can see is there is no cookie cutter approach, and that our current open primary system is, as of now, the most widely used one.
So you mentioned now that we have an election specialist coming on, or an election expert coming on. So tell us more what we'll hear about in the next 2 episodes.
Yeah, we are so lucky to be joined by Michael Domino. He's a professor at Widener University Commonwealth Law School and a visiting professor at the Joseph F. Rice School of Law, University of South Carolina. But most importantly, he is the author of several books on election law, so he is the right guy for us to talk to. Next week, he will talk in more detail about these varied forms of primaries and what the legal and political implications of them are. And then the next week, he'll discuss ranked choice voting, which to me sounds a bit like an SAT logic problem, but that also seems to indicate it has a lot of logic to it. So we will hear what that's about. We're really excited to talk about this. This could have a lot of implications for the way we vote in our state, and we want you all to be informed. I know we threw a lot at you today, but in the episode page and the show notes, you will see links to the current 5 bills that are proposed related to primaries, as well as a nice overview from the National Conference of State Legislatures about the different election types. So hopefully that'll give you a little more content to dig into if you're interested.
Awesome. Well, thank you for a very quick primer on all of this, Katie. Thank you for going over this with all of us, because it's confusing and there are a lot of changes coming, potentially coming. No one really knows yet. And we have some very in-depth episodes that will cover this, as you just mentioned. So having this primer was very helpful. And as always, to everyone listening, thanks. Tune in again next week, and have a great day, everyone. Hi, Simple Civics Greenville County listeners. Nathaniel here. If you've made it this far, then we think you'll really love our newsletter. Sign up for bonus content, updates, and more right in your inbox. Look for the link in the description that says newsletter to sign up, or visit us at simplecivicgreenvillecounty.org. Find the link in the menu that says newsletter and sign up there. We'll see you again next week.